animals, the federal government has been convicted of breaking its own laws. In a landmark ruling, a federal court judge in Vancouver has ruled that the federal minister of the environment broke the law by refusing to identify the critical habitat of an at-risk species. The judge condemning the feds for claiming to not be able to find those habitats when just about anybody can go on a guided tour to those areas. Linda Aylesworth explains.
They're called sage grouse, birds famous for their elaborate courtship rituals. To see them, you'd have to travel to the southeastern corner of Alberta. That's because BC no longer has any. And soon enough, it's feared that Alberta won't either.
The main cause of decline of species in Canada is loss or damage to their habitat, the places where they live. Over 86% of Canada's species are in decline because of loss or damage to their habitat.
And the sage grouse is no exception. Protecting the critical habitat of this and Canada's many other threatened and endangered creatures was the very reason our federal government passed the Species at Risk Act years ago. So why are they still in trouble?
What's wrong is that even though they passed the act, they didn't do anything afterwards. So the act was passed in 2003, and from that point on, the government dragged its heels.
So while hundreds of animals were listed, none of their critical habitat was being identified and protected. Not even the most famous of species, like BC's own Vancouver Island marmot.
We thought if they won't protect the habitat of the Vancouver Island marmot, which is one of the best known endangered species in all of Canada, what species will they step up to the plate and protect their habitat?
So the lawyers at Ecojustice and the conservationists at the Wilderness Committee, both BC-based nonprofit organizations, joined forces to change the way things weren't being done. 3 years ago, they went to the federal court and they brought the story of the sage grouse with them. Finally, last week, a decision.
And the judge sided with us completely. And what he concluded was the Minister of the Environment can't use the law at his discretion. The law is clear. It says that you have to identify critical habitat, and that the minister erred when he failed to do that.
Erred big time, because while the critical habitat of the sage grouse is common knowledge among bird watchers, the ministry's recovery team said they couldn't find it.
This judgment that seems to apply to sage grouse applies to killer whales, applies to Vancouver Island marmots, applies to bluebirds, and applies to beluga whales. So it's really exciting, and it means we actually might have a tool in our hand to use to prevent species from going extinct in Canada.
But even after the federal government identifies the habitats needed by species at risk to survive, it's up to each individual province to do something about it. In this, BC is particularly lacking because we have the unfortunate distinction of having the most species at risk and the worst protection record.
The politicians, I don't think, have heard from the public that this is an important value and they have to start doing their job. And that's kind of the missing link.